Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. When we look at the news headlines, we see Puerto Rico all over them, which is something we don't see every day. But today is a special day, unfortunately a sad one, in which Puerto Rico has gone functionally bankrupt. Although that may not be the correct technical term, they are in deep water in many ways right now. What's the United States doing about it? And for us in Hawaii, what in the world does this have to do with our own state? Why should we care? I've got somebody with me today who's going to be Skyping in for an interview who knows all about this issue. He's Anderson Blom. We call him Andy. He's the executive director of Hawaii Grassroots Action, which happens to be our component partner organization with the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii that is advocating for the welfare and benefit of Hawaii, a better economy, a better government, a better society, but doing it from Washington, D.C. He's been with us many times before, and I enjoy working with him greatly. Just got back from Washington, D.C., where we worked together on advancing policies for the benefit of Hawaii, and now, hopefully, for Puerto Rico and the rest of the nation. Please welcome with me today Andy Blom. Andy, aloha, and welcome back to the show, Ehana Kako.
Aloha. It's a great pleasure to be in Hawaii, at least electronically.
I see you've got your lovely aloha shirt. They call you the guy from Hawaii when you're up there in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it's something I wear proudly, both the title and my commercial plug Rain Spooner memorial shirt here. So, and you look, I don't know, you look a lot younger than when I left 3 months ago. I hope that my not being there doesn't have anything to do with that.
Well, that was the energy of being with you and our team in Washington, D.C. And for our viewers, Grassroots Institute is the leading free market think tank advocating for free market solutions for the economy. We're nonpartisan here in the state of Hawaii, but there is so much that needs to be done from outside of the state of Hawaii in order to advance our economy and improve our government. Maybe Andy can mention a couple of things because we work closely together as he directs our work up there in D.C.
Well, this is very true, and it's important that we have that connection and that link. There are things that happen to Hawaii that can only be dealt with in Washington, but it is the policy-driven direction from the Grassroots Institute that Grassroots Hawaii Action attempts to implement up here. And we try to keep both the Institute and Hawaii in general informed of what's happening to them up here.
Right.
So it's an interchange, but it's important that Hawaii have this voice and that we communicate back home.
I won't say you've been lurking around the dark corridors of Congress, although you probably have been, but you've been very intimately involved in working with congressional delegations and other individuals and organizations in Washington, D.C., in trying to bring about some kind of improvement in the situation of Puerto Rico. Well, let's just dive right into it. What is the crisis that Puerto Rico is facing today, Andy?
Well, the crisis is that actually on May 1st, they defaulted on $422 million worth of bond debt. Now, this is bad, but they're facing a $77 billion default in the very near future.
Now,
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's take this back a little bit, because really, while this is a crisis, it's just the latest milestone in a series of devastating blows that Puerto Rico has faced. What's really behind the economic woes that Puerto Rico is facing now?
Well, there are several factors, and everything's always a little more complicated than you want it to be. But the factors that are principally at work here are, first of all, very serious government overspending and corrupt government. And just very irresponsible government overspending. Another factor is that Puerto Rico used to have a very beneficial tax advantage for pharmaceutical manufacturers. When that evaporated, they lost what Puerto Rico was producing most of the pharmaceuticals used in the United States. And that entire industry went away, and a whole lot of high-paying jobs that helped all sectors of the economy went away. So these are things that get pointed to, but there are underlying factors that they can't do anything about.
Yes, and I know we're going to dive into one of those deeply today and as we talk about it, but let's just for a moment review the couple of factors you mentioned, particularly the actual role of government. How is it that the people of Puerto Rico tolerate a government that is so inefficient and so corrupt and spends far more than they possibly could afford? Is there a certain mindset, a certain culture when it comes to thinking about what the role of government is?
Very much so. Puerto Rico truly is an example of failed socialism. That the free market has been drummed out of Puerto Rico so that people turn not to themselves for problems or issues or for progress. They look to the government to take care of everything. And the government is very corrupt in doing that. And the government keeps its position by buying more and more votes, by giving away more and more. But you can't give away when you're not taking anything in.
Well,
And
you know,
there's never-
Andy, I know of another place in the United
Excuse me.
States, although there are many places. I know of one in particular where there is also a mantra that says when we have problems, we need to go to the federal government in order to get money, whether it's transportation, education, or our economy, the livelihood of our economy, such as the need to have military bases. We also have a place where there is a high level of corruption, according to objective third-party sources. A report was released just this week, ranking Hawaii #1 in a unique category. It happens to be the category where there is a high level of corruption both in the legislative and in the administrative level, and we happen to rank #1 in the nation for having both hits, legislative
Well,
and
it's important to have balance in government.
That's right. So when I'm talking about Hawaii being this way, is it fair for me to say that there are some parallels to what's going on in Puerto Rico?
Very much so. And this is one of the things I think it's important we talk about. There are very real parallels here, and there are very real dangers. And part of it is the population not being informed and educated. Part of it is the population willingly turning a blind eye because they're being given things by the government and they don't realize where those things are, it's coming out of their pocket and that the government's spending money they don't have. But the parallels are very real, and we can end up in the same kind of situation.
Now, Andy, I cut you off before you were going to go into another cause, an underlying cause for the problems of Puerto Rico's economy, and one that you told us, have no power over. And I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that and let us know whether that affects Hawaii as well. So what is this big looming underlying cause for the tanking of the economy of Puerto Rico, something they have no power to control?
It's something they have no power to control. We have no power to control. Everybody talks about it. It's time to do something. The Jones Act is almost universally recognized as being a significant contributor to Puerto Rico's problem. The General Accounting Office, and you're not going to find anybody more bipartisan than that, did a study in 2012, said Puerto Rico has to have a Jones Act exemption. The Kruger economic report that came out last year and was done by economists favorable to the Puerto Rican style of government said Puerto Rico has to get a Jones Act exemption. And the reason is, and this will sound very familiar to everyone living there in Hawaii, the reason is energy costs are impossible. Their energy costs are like our energy costs. Everything costs significantly more. I just heard in testimony someone say that the same Ford Focus costs $6,000 more in Puerto Rico than it does in Florida. We're talking about, you could almost drive between them. I mean, we're very close here.
Well, let me give a little advisory to some of our viewers who may not be fully familiar with the Jones Act, the 1920 Maritime Cabotage Laws, which have been around, as the date suggests, for almost 100 years. And they govern the shipping of cargo between any two United States ports. And Andy, you know the 4 criteria that must be met for a ship to operate within that market of any 2 American ports.
Absolutely. Anything between 2 American ports, and Puerto Rico is one, has to be on an American-built, American-flagged, American-crewed, and American-owned ship. And this does a wonderful job of protecting a very few jobs. It does a wonderful job of protecting a shipping industry that has fallen from being the number 2 maritime nation in the world to the 51st maritime nation in the world. But it's extremely harmful to the people and the economy of Puerto Rico, and it's extremely harmful to the people and economy of Hawaii. And we're working, I'm sorry, please.
Sorry to cut you off there, but before we get into the particular harms of the Jones Act to the economies of Hawaii and Puerto Rico, I want to go back to something you were just talking about, and you said it's a form of protectionism, kind of the way we protected the automotive industry in Detroit for many, many years with trade barriers and tariffs, and as a result, we almost destroyed our automotive industry. And fortunately, when we lifted that protectionism, we have gotten a robust industry. But you pointed out, Andy, that at one time we were the second largest builder of ships on Earth, next only to Great Britain. We had powerful armadas of ships during World War II. But now, if I'm correct, we have become one of the smallest in the world amongst the free nations, producing less than 0.5% of the tonnage of deep bottom ocean cargo carrying vessels. And so the question I want to ask you is, what in the world were we protecting? We certainly have not been, during this nearly 100-year period of time, we have not protected the shipbuilding industry. We've actually destroyed it.
We have, and we've destroyed the American Maritime Union. It's very frustrating because there are 7 shipyards in the United States that build deep bottom ships. 5 of them only build military ships. So we're really talking about this tiny sliver. And one of the other points we're leading to, it takes 5 times as long, approximately 5 times as long, and costs 5 times as much to have that U.S. deep bottom ship built as it does for the same ship in Japan or Thailand or South Korea or Denmark. And this badly impacts our trade agreements as well, because the rest of the world is kind of tired of this.
So what we see here is just a basic economic analysis, the most simple of economic analyses, and that is the supply and demand curve. And that when that supply goes down artificially, caused by the Jones Act in terms of the supply of ships being produced in the United States, the cost factor goes up tremendously, and that's what we've seen, as you point out, that the cost of ships built by us are 5 times the amount compared to our allies. Go ahead.
Exactly. Think if you could only buy an American car, and they only made, 10,000 a year. So you're on a waiting list. It'd be like Soviet Russia. You'd be waiting forever and paying much, much, much more for a less modern vehicle. Well, this is where we've put Hawaii and Puerto Rico. One of the biggest impacts of this on Puerto Rico is energy costs, because it's an island like we are. No offense to our Puerto Rican friends and any Puerto Rican listeners. It's not as beautiful as we are, but it's a very beautiful tropical island. However, all their electricity basically comes from oil carried on Jones Act ships. So to turn, it makes power costs one of the principal factors of every family and every business's budget. It's just 3, 4, 5 times what people pay in the U.S.
That's incredible. We've got about a minute left before we go to a break, but I want you to just summarize, or at least highlight a point that you were getting to that we'll talk more about, and that is that the Jones Act drives up prices, and that it's done that in Puerto Rico.
Absolutely, it has, in every sector of the economy. And we're talking about an economy, the average family income, the median income in Puerto Rico is $19,000. But they're paying Hawaii kinds of costs for mainland goods.
That's incredible. Well, we'll get back and talk a little bit more about the demise of the Puerto Rico economy, the Jones Act, and how that might affect Hawaii, as well as some solutions, when we come back from a short break with Andy Blom, who's directing our grassroots work up in Washington, D.C., I'm Keli'i Akina. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this very short break.
Aloha, this is Maria Mera, and I'm here to invite you to my bilingual show, Viva Hawaii on Think Tech Hawaii, every other Monday at 3 p.m. We're here to inform, motivate, and entertain you. Join us. Hola, soy María Mera y estoy aquí para invitaros a mi show bilingüe Viva Hawaii en Think Tech Hawaii cada 2 lunes a las 3 de la tarde. Estamos aquí para informaros, motivaros y entreteneros. Apuntaros.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at Think Tech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm fortunate to be able to host Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. I hope you'll join in with us every Tuesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. to see the interesting people we have to share with you their information. Aloha.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako, and I want to remind you that we're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, broadcasting from Honolulu, Hawaii, in Hawaii time at 2 o'clock p.m. on Mondays. We have an audience that spans the globe, and we're so glad that so many of you are tuning in here. And it's possible because of the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, so I want to tip my hat to them. I congratulate Jay Fidel, the creator and the ongoing sustaining leader of Think Tech Hawaii, and the tremendous staff and team who put about 35 hours of original content onto the air every single week. And you can view that either live through streaming on the internet, or watch it rebroadcast on cable channel, or perhaps, if you like, go straight to the website in order to get that content, which is at thinktechhawaii.com. Now, back again to Anderson Blom. Andy is up in D.C. working on some things that will hopefully bring reprieve from some of the damages done by the Jones Act. And one of the things that we've got to be aware of is that what's taking place with Puerto Rico now could potentially be a real problem for Hawaii, not because we are a territory, not because we have the same conditions in every arena that Puerto Rico does, but because we have something in common. We have the impact of the Jones Act, and it impacts us more than any other state because Hawaii is surrounded 360 degrees by water, and virtually everything needs to get here by shipping. Andy, back to you. What are some of the parallels between the Puerto Rico experience with regard to the Jones Act and Hawaii itself?
Well, first of all, it's of course the cost, and it impacts every part of both Hawaii and Puerto Rico's economy. It's not just that you're paying more in the grocery store, it's that the grocery store is paying more for electricity because the fuel necessary to drive the power plants comes in on Jones Act ships, and that raises each of their employees' costs, and there's just this pyramid effect that goes on. Puerto Rico, it's more dramatic in some ways because their economy is a Caribbean economy. It's just not as strong or stable as ours, so the impact is even greater. But we have to be very aware of just where this can be taking us in terms of our cost of living. One of the things that's happening to Puerto Rico is a mass exodus. 350,000 Puerto Ricans left there in the last year. Now, that's a big part of the population. They go to Florida the instant they set foot, they're American citizens. But the problem here is the same as because costs are too high. They can't find a house because costs are too high. So we have the same kind of brain drain and youth drain. It's more dramatic in Puerto Rico, but we should be looking at their government corruption, at the impact of the Jones Act, at their mass out-migration, and saying, isn't this happening here and we can't go down that path? And one of the things about the bankruptcy, about their defaulting on their bonds yesterday, and the larger default that's looming, is it is constitutionally not possible for Puerto Rico to file for bankruptcy. It is constitutionally against the law for a state or territory to file for bankruptcy. So when this kind of trouble happens, Uncle Sam is not going to bail us out. They're not going to bail Hawaii out. They're not going to bail California or Illinois out. And one of the reasons that there was no legislation to help Puerto Rico is that Congress refused to move on legislation that looked like bankruptcy. So it's a complicated situation, but going back to the Jones Act, it's a complicated situation with some really basic problems that have caused it. And they're problems. Now, I'm talking right along here, not giving Dr. Aquina his chance, but there's good news about this too. And that is that this can be an opportunity to get legislation, when legislation gets in place to try to help solve Puerto Rico's economic problems. And the legislation that's being talked about is designed to really take over most of the financial decisions of the Puerto Rican government. It's designed to put an oversight board in, a fiscal control board, that's going to not let this corruption and this spending happen. But what we're working on is amendments to that legislation to provide either an exemption for Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and in case anyone out there in Alaska is looking, we'd like to get you and Guam into this too, but to provide an exemption from the Jones Act for Puerto Rico. And I'm working with these legislators who are considering this to include Hawaii in that, or a reform of the Jones Act for everybody in America. And that would be to reform our shipbuilding and what's called international relay, which is allowing international ships to visit American ports and transfer cargo.
Well, Andy, there are several creative solutions I know that you're working on, and I'm going to put that into the third segment of our program today. But first, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the impact. You've made a strong statement. You've said that the economic impact of the Jones Act, for the most part, has been rather debilitating upon the economy of Puerto Rico, and that could be the case in Hawaii. I don't get the sense that our political leaders actually even have the data with which to determine what the impact has been, and it's almost as if the ostrich has its head in the sand. How much good data has been generated, or has there been a resistance to actually doing the kinds of surveys and econometric modeling that would show how much the Jones Act costs?
Well, this is a brilliant and much needed idea. And quite simply, the data is insufficient. We know how much it hurts. When we go to the grocery store in Hawaii, we know how much it hurts. When we buy a house and every piece that's in there had an extra cost to it because it was on a Jones Act ship, we know how much it hurts. But the data isn't completely there. And one of the best public services, one of the best services that can be done for everybody in America, because the Jones Act does actually impact everybody in America, would be a really serious study about how much it impacts not all the different pieces of the economy in Hawaii, but of each of the states as well as Puerto Rico.
That's right. And as you well know, Grassroots Institute and the Grassroots Action are very busy in designing a research project and seeking the funding that will give university-level documentation as to the economic impact of the Jones Act, not only on Hawaii and Puerto Rico and the non-contiguous regions, but also on each and every one of the 50 states, as well as the national impact because of trade restrictions. Let me just ask you a little bit about that, Andy. Is the Jones Act, as we have been talking about, merely a problem for the non-contiguous regions like Puerto Rico and Hawaii, or is there a nationwide and national cost factor due to the Jones Act?
Absolutely there is, and a really thorough study would very much enlighten people. But I pay more for my gasoline up here in Washington, D.C. because it has to get on a Jones Act ship in Houston and come up to Baltimore. And what's the big deal? Well, it costs $6 a barrel for that ship from Houston to Baltimore. It costs $2 a barrel for oil to ship from South America to Baltimore.
Well, that's something.
Everything that goes up and down our coast, that goes up and down the Mississippi River, everything that travels around this country as goods that way has to be on a Jones Act ship. People who get on a ferry in Seattle to go across to Bellingham pay more because that ferry had to be a Jones Act ship. And it's kind of omnivorous. It's eating away at pocketbooks all over the country without people knowing it. You spoke of data, and if we could get the kind of data, and I know, to throw a compliment to my colleagues back home, when people want to know about this up here, they go to Grassroots Institute of Hawaii websites to find out about the Jones Act. So, and they're telling me this. I'm not having to send them there. But more information is desperately needed. But it impacts people all across this country.
We have just a few minutes in this second segment, and I'd like to address something before we start talking about solutions that we're working on in Washington, D.C. Very often, there is resistance to even the most modest updating of the Jones Act because of a certain set of beliefs about what would happen. For example, some say that it would result in a decline of national security. Others claim it would result in a decline of union jobs. Those are probably the two most common objections to any type of updating of the Jones Act. What are your thoughts about these?
Well, it's possible that it would hurt a few union shipbuilding jobs in the U.S., although you brought up the auto industry, and when competition increased, we grew.
Right.
And if we forced American shipbuilding and shipping to be competitive, I have every bit of faith in American ingenuity. We would become competitive. If we took away the barriers that are protecting this and opened the market, the free market solution would be healthier, not just for the people of America, but for the industries involved. And I think, that's inevitably the way to go. In terms of national security, it was really important in 1920. It's probably really important in 1945. That's a long time ago. We don't fight wars the same way. We buy military ships from other nations. The world has changed. The world has changed very dramatically, except for people in Puerto Rico and Hawaii who are paying through the nose for very, very old-fashioned legislation.
That's right. And, with respect to national defense and security, a modest updating of the Jones Act that simply allowed us to purchase our ships at a lower cost from our allies rather than having to compete for the very few ships that are produced in the United States could be implemented without in any way changing the requirements as to the personnel on ships. They could still be American merchant marine. They could still be owned by the United States, still be flagged by the United States. And the clearest example is the large number of foreign ships built by our allies that are purchased by the United States military and used as part of our logistical fleet because they cost less, they're higher in technology. You certainly are able to put American standards onto the ship. And so that is evidence, isn't it, Andy, that a slight update in the Jones Act is not going to harm national security?
No, I think that's a really important point, and that is that we don't have to take the whole thing apart. A little bit of reform, a slight updating would not only not harm national security, but it would help all of the people who ship things between American ports. It would help all American citizens without causing any serious damage to, as you say, our national security,
That's right.
Also to our maritime industry.
That's right. And you made a good point earlier, and that is that there are really terribly few jobs that would be lost at all in the commercial shipbuilding industry to opening up competition, and it's quite possible that they would increase. But for those who are in the state of Hawaii as well as Puerto Rico, there would be nothing but an increase of jobs by updating the Jones Act.
Yes.
Because you'd have more free market trade, more ships in port, you'd need more maritime related jobs to man those ships, you'd need more stevedores, you need more longshoremen. A modest updating would actually result in a growth in union jobs. We're going to take a short break now and come back and take a look at solutions, not just talk as to what's wrong because of the Jones Act, but really some specific solutions that Andy and Grassroot are working on with our allies and colleagues, not only in DC, but across the world, that could actually improve the economies of Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and every one of the 50 states, as well as our nation. Don't go away, because I think you'll find that very fascinating.
Aloha, I'm Kaui Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here on Think Tech Hawaii every Friday at 3 p.m. We address issues of importance for those of us who live here on the most isolated landmass on the planet. Please come join me Fridays at 3 p.m. Mahalo.
Aloha, this is Reg Baker, and I am the host of Business in Hawaii. We talk about positive stories of businesses in Hawaii, how they have been successful, and how they have overcome some of the obstacles that a lot of us encounter when we try to have a business here. And believe it or not, there are a number of positive stories here, and we want to talk to all of you. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it rebroadcasts again on Olelo Channel 54. So I sure hope to see you next time. Please tune in on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Well, it's our final segment today on a very fascinating program on Ehana Kako, focusing on Puerto Rico and the Jones Act, but really what impact that all of that has on Hawaii as well as the rest of our country. But before we go back to our guest, Ehana Kako sounds like a venerable old saying here in the state of Hawaii that we often use, e pule kako, which means let's pray together. Ehana Kako means let's work together. And we say that at the Grassroot Institute because we believe that we should be working together with all people to build a better economy, a better government, a better society. Think of the terrible alternative of not working together, and that's the problem that we have to solve. The way we work together is by pursuing good issues, good policy around those issues, and hopefully you'll see some of that today with regard to the Jones Act. Now, back to Andy Blom, who directs our work in Washington, D.C., Grassroot Hawaii Action. Andy, we often miss one of the most important aspects of the impact of the Jones Act, which is not just domestic, but what we look like to the world and how we shut our borders really to good free trade as a result of the Jones Act. For example, just one disincentive happens to be that if a ship is carrying, say, grain to feed cattle or cattle feed from coming out of South Korea, it doesn't have any incentive to come to Hawaii directly because under the Jones Act, if it stops in Hawaii and dumps its cargo, it has to turn around empty, and that just doesn't make sense. Instead, we end up sending that cargo perhaps to Vancouver, trucking it down to San Francisco, and putting it onto Jones Act compliant ships back to Hawaii, inflating the cost tremendously. Now multiply that kind of triangulation many times, we see a loss of trade. So what's going on here? Other nations, how do they regard us, and what's the impact upon a free trade?
They view the Jones Act as the granddaddy of all protectionism.
That's right.
And there are two trade deals, very important trade deals, under consideration, trying to be discussed, hammered out right now. One, of course, it's incredibly important to Hawaii, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the Atlantic version of that, which is TTIP, and I have no idea what that stands for, is being hammered out with the European Union. Every nation involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership wanted Jones Act reform.
And there's a very specific kind of Jones Act reform. To clarify for our viewers, they're not asking us to eliminate the Jones Act, to repeal the Jones Act, or to take away most of the features, those features that protect national defense or union jobs. They're asking for one particular amendment.
There's two that come up, and the
Or two,
European
in fact,
Union
yes.
is very firm on this. They're leading with these two items as critical in their trade negotiations. One is a shipbuild reform, because these nations all around the world are building ships, and we've created protectionism that make our shipyards not competitive. They want to be able to sell their ships here.
That's right.
The second thing is what we call international relay.
Yes.
And Keli'i was alluding to this. You know, if a ship leaves Korea full of goods, it can't stop in Hawaii, dispense some of that, take on Hawaii goods, and go on to Los Angeles.
Or it doesn't have any economic incentive to do that.
Well, it can't do that because it's now traveling between two American ports.
That's right.
Okay, so at the point that it goes to an American port, it can't go to the next American port carrying any cargo between those two. So, you know, it can dump half its goods, but it can't take anything on.
An international relay then would remedy that. What we call
Yes,
international relay would allow a ship to go to Puerto Rico, disembark some cargo, take on some cargo, and then go on to Miami or to Honolulu and do the same transactions and then go on to Los Angeles. So the economic incentive would be tremendous to benefit places that are completely left out of the loop.
Exactly, and right now we're in a situation, think of, particularly Hawaii, we are the most geographically distinct place on Earth, but the far, Asia sails past us to the West Coast, and the West Coast sails past us to Asia, but only American-built, American-flagged, American-crewed, American-owned ships can go between Hawaii and Los Angeles as part, they cannot then continue on to another place and dispense stuff that's been picked up in Hawaii. It's frankly insane. It just is, we can sit and watch stuff go back and forth and watch our wallet shrink and shrink and shrink because we have to stay within this very restricted area. And the rest of the world wants relief from this. They want America, which is the model of free market success. They want America to have a free market attitude towards shipping.
That's right. In fact, Andy, you're fully aware that at Grassroots, we are working very hard to educate the key parties, policymakers, as well as the public, on the importance of international relay reform. And in the process, we're also collaborating with international parties from other countries, as well as corporate level, in order to create a rousing voice that says, here's something that's going to be good for each of our states and territories, here's something that's going to be good for Hawaii, here's something that's going to make a very big difference. But would you let our viewers know the part that you play in this, once we have our proposals and so forth in hand, what we do as you go to the Congress on behalf of Hawaii, really, on behalf of the Grassroots movement, as our director of our action organization?
Well, what I do up here in Washington is to work directly with members of Congress, with their staff, and with influencers, with getting support and coalition support from other organizations to put these ideas in front of Congress people and to put the weight of other organizations, other national organizations behind this to make them take a fresh look at this. Right now, because of Puerto Rico, I forget which presidential advisor it was who said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Because of the significant economic problems in Puerto Rico, the discussion is on the table about an exemption for the Jones Act. So what I'm presently very much involved with, and I've worked with colleagues in Puerto Rico in helping to move this forward. But I'm talking to those legislators about, yes, Puerto Rico needs Jones Act reform, but not just Puerto Rico. That to do this only for Puerto Rico would be a mistake. So we're working to get language into any Puerto Rican rescue or solution legislation that also seeks to reform the Jones Act, seeks
That's right.
to the ship build and international relay portion. Is this a promise? No. But is this a good opportunity to perhaps
right.
advance this? Absolutely.
And this, of course, goes back to our research initiative, to determine through empirical research the cost of the Jones Act on every single one of the 50 states and territories and upon the entire nation, because we have to recognize that the Jones Act is not really a Puerto Rico problem, although Puerto Rico is disproportionately impacted. It's not just a Hawaii problem, although there's a disparate impact upon Hawaii. It is a problem for the United States of America, not only in terms of the immediate costs on the cost of living, but in terms of the opportunity cost, what we miss out on in terms of our trade relationships with other nations. And so that's part of the work that needs to be done so that, Andy, you are able to go to the congressional delegations of all 50 states with a very strong message saying this is not begging from Hawaii and Puerto Rico. This is something that needs to be looked at for the entire nation. How are efforts coming along in order to gain an ear to that understanding of the Jones Act?
Actually, this has been an interesting experience because as the understanding of the Jones Act is fairly incomplete up here. It's not on most people's radar. But as I start to talk, I'll cite one senator from a southern coastal state who I was discussing this with. And I pointed out problems to Hawaii, pointed out the problems, to Puerto Rico. And he said, well, what does this have to do with us? And I said, well, your pig farmers are buying their grain from South America because it costs too much to ship it down the Mississippi from the Midwest. And he said, oh, no, really? I saw him 2 days later. He said, I got on the phone. We're paying for the Jones Act. This is wrong.
There you go. Well, I congratulate you because the point came home, and it needs to come home with an illustration like that, vivid for every single state. Andy, I want to thank you for being with us today on the usual weekly program, E Hana Kako of the Grassroots Institute, and I thank you for your work in leading Grassroots Hawaii Action up there in D.C. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
Well, thank you. I at least got to be back home electronically, and thank everybody at the Institute because their background work is what makes it possible to persuade these folks. So thank you.
Well, and to all of the people watching, we thank you for viewing us today. And to our friends in Puerto Rico, to policymakers, to legislators, and to the general public who are suffering in an inordinate way, we're fighting for an updating of the Jones Act that is sensitive to our national interests of national security and job security, but one that will allow us to move further into the 21st century as a stronger trade destination for the world. And we stand with you from Hawaii as well. Much aloha until next week on E Hana Kako. We will see you and tune in. Much aloha again.